Hello, everyone. And today we're going to be talking about some classroom management ideas and strategies, just because we know that a lot of students have started to misbehave because they've been at home for over a year, right, Tara?
A long time, 18 months, right? Is
Yeah.
now
And
it's a
so some
long
of our,
time to not follow routine.
yeah, and I think some of our students, had structured homes and some of them didn't for whatever reason or whatever their setup was like. And so now we've got to kind of bring them back and think about different strategies that we're going to use for some classroom management and some structure for what that might look like in their day.
Let's start with the standing operating procedures, and then maybe go back and talk about what our action plan would be first. So we kind of co-created this document, and it's looking like what are a lot of notable standard procedures, what you're doing at the start of class, during your class, end of class, and kind of a miscellaneous area. So if there's anything that you think of that you need to add, of course, please feel free to make a copy and add to this of something that might be going on in your classroom. So what does a standard operating procedure look like, Stephanie?
Yeah, so this is a great way to kind of organize your classroom. I know when I was first teaching, I kind of struggled with, well, what do I want to do when kids end their work early? And then they ask me and I'm like, oh, I don't know. So it's really good to kind of think about your lesson and think about those misconceptions or areas where students might finish early or they might have questions. Students always have to use the restroom. So what are you going to do if that's the case? And so you can see right here, there's a couple different examples on some of these slides that we have either found or that we've created. And for example, if you have a question, students are always going to have a question. And I know sometimes my first year, I thought, oh, students won't have a question. They're just going to get it. So having that standard operating procedure in place allowed them to know, okay, what do I do if I don't understand? What do I do if I finish my work early? What do I do if I come into class and I'm tardy or I'm a little bit late? How do I need to pack up? And so having that in place allows students to not have as much chaos and they know exactly what they're to do. So right here, this one is, I have a question. So it's kind of a check and connect. So when I have a question in my class, I want my students to first check the video or search on Google. So I like to provide a lot of video instructions, which then they can go back and rewatch, or I want them to search on Google. If they cannot find the answer, then they go to step 2 and they ask a friend. If the friend doesn't know, then they fill out a Google form and then they connect with me when I'm ready and I will pull them up based on that Google form. And so this procedure in place allows students to know exactly what they're supposed to do rather than interrupting me in a small group type of setting. And so once I have that standard operating procedure, I can go over here, take this check mark, and I'm able to check off that I have that one done and ready to go.
And one thing to add, once you have this standing operating procedure and you've gone and you've taught it to the kids and you're working on it, and it's not just the first week, we're continuing to provide that instruction on what check and connect is, then you could start to reduce the amount of language that you use and use that as a verbal prompt. You can, when a student comes up and they begin to ask you a question, or they call out, or they raise their hand on what they're supposed to do, you can use the simple terms of check and connect. Have you checked and connected? So we start to see that consistent language throughout our classroom over and over with those prompts and that continuous teaching of what check and connect is.
Yeah, and I think too, we made these on Canva. So you can go over to Canva and you can create your own and hang them up in your classroom, or maybe you make little cards for certain students that might need a reminder, like a hint card for those students. This one is finishing your work early. Again, it's like a flow chart. So there's 2 different types of ways that you can kind of create these step-by-step directions or like a flow chart type of way. And so right here, do you have other work that needs completed? Yes or no? If the answer is yes, they need to finish it. If the answer is no, maybe they work on a Genius hour or they start their homework or whatever other activity you might have. So again, these were just made in Canva. And if you search in Canva, you can find different templates and then you just change whatever you want to type or download the background to a Google slide and then you can write on there. So like, I think I just typed step by step. And you have all these different options and you can kind of create these different posters to remind students. And again, it's that ongoing conversation with students. And I love what Tara said, that you can just then, after they get used to it, maybe a month later, check and connect. It's simple, it's quick, rather than saying the whole procedure again.
One thing we start to see when we get to this time of year is the honeymoon phase is over, right? We're in school, we're in a routine, our days are longer, kids are needing a break. They're maybe not as outside as often because maybe recess is getting rained out or the weather is cold at home. So they're needing to find, ways and to kind of stay on task. So that consistent language will help support that, and that consistent teaching of the language will help support that as well. Like, two things that we have to know as we're creating these standard operating procedures is there's two ways to change behavior. It's to teach it and to reinforce it. I kind of put some notes down there at the bottom. We need to think of behavior like a math problem, right? If we teach students a math problem once, are all of our students going to get it? Probably not. Maybe one or two might get it after you teach it once. If you teach it twice, are all of the students going to get it? Nope, we're probably not. We're going to add maybe a couple more that have an understanding. But as you begin that ongoing teaching of that math problem, more and more students are going to catch on and follow. And when you start to have the majority of the students following, the other ones will start to follow in place as well. And then when we go back, right, when we're going back and it's getting closer to testing time or iReady assessment, or maybe we go back and review some of those things. So remembering that consistent language, we teach it again, we might teach it again, and it doesn't have to be very long the first time, but it can be subtle within transition or within the activity that you do, using that consistent language and continuing to teach it. Because I know it can get frustrating at this time of year when our students are starting to get off task and get a little bit antsy because a lot of things are changing within their routine.
And so then that brings us to the action plan. And so the action plan is talking about what are the problem behaviors. So think about your classroom. When are you seeing different behaviors come up? I know for me, when I was teaching, it was during those transition times. It was before class started and it was right when class was ending. So when are the behaviors occurring in your classroom? And just kind of reflect real quick about when those are happening. Then when you have that, think of what resource you want to do. So for me, because it was before my classroom started, I wanted to do like a agenda type item. So my students knew exactly what was expected. And a lot of research shows that it's good to see it and hear it. And so I would say, welcome to class. And then I would just tell them, get started on this and kind of go through. But a lot of times it was a lot of different tasks that I wanted them to do. And so right here, if you look at this example, and there's a couple others that I put for my problem when I was seeing the majority of behaviors. So right here, the kids come in, they have the expectations. They know what they're supposed to do at their desk. They check in, they do some type of rep, which is spiral review, and then they read silently. So again, there was ways for me to look at my standard operating procedures, and I was able to really focus in. Well, I have expectations laid out for them. They know what needs to be on their desk. And then if they finished, I was covering that SOP. They were to read silently. They knew exactly what they were to do if they had finished early. So again, thinking of all of those different questions that could arise or problems or things and trying to prevent them from happening in your classroom. So that way they're not asking me, well, I finished this science rep, what do I do now? Well, they know exactly what they're supposed to do because it's on the board and I'm able to also verbally say it.
So now you've gone through your standing operating procedure. You've identified where that problem behavior, like Stephanie was talking about, hers was that beginning of the day. So we provided them structure in that. But now we would talk about what's our action plan to implement this and what are the strategies that we need to accompany those resources. So we have we've identified the problem. We have the resource now to support the problem. What's our action plan to implement and strategies? So what would you say you went about implementing that buzzwork, and what was your action plan to implement?
Yeah, so my goal was to cut the buzzwork into 15 minutes at the start of class. Now, the first day it took around 20 to 30 minutes. And I think you have to realize that at the beginning, it is going to take a little bit longer because I'm going over and I'm reinforcing different behaviors that I want to see. I'm telling students, great job, I'm giving praise, and I'm also redirecting students if they might not follow something, because we have to practice it and practice it and practice it. So again, the goal is to cut that time. And I know creating these different resources or SOPs can be really time consuming at the beginning, but they do slowly go down in time, and it will save you time later in the year to do those exciting activities that you want to do in your classroom.
And one thing to note, when you are providing that praise for the students and we are talking about behavior, we want to make sure that our praise is labeled praise. So when we are saying good job, we might add a couple words to that. Good job staying in your space, or good job following the agenda. Good job. So they know exactly what they're doing a good job doing, and other students can also hear that as well. So I think that's important, that our praise is labeled for behavior, not good job with your handwriting looking neat. That's currently not what we're focusing on. We're focusing on that classroom management. So we want to make sure that we label that praise as such. Whatever behavior you want them to do, we always use that positive framing. For example, when we would say, good job keeping your hands and feet to yourself in your space, right? That's the expectation we want them. So we would praise that expectation. So now we worked on implementing it. Now, what other strategies might we have that would accompany the resources as well? We've talked about the time. Now, how could you reinforce it with labeled praise? What are some other ways that you might find reinforcing?
And I think don't giving up on it. Sometimes I've seen teachers that they introduce an agenda and it doesn't work by day 2, and they're like, it's just not going to work. And so you've got to be consistent with it, keep using it, keep showing it with the students, or whatever your problem is, and coming up with that solution. Keep on going and try it out for more than just a couple of days. What would you suggest, Tara, for how long?
Well, I think that's one of the things that's hard about behavior, is we feel like, oh, I tried this, and we try all these things, and like you said, we are going to give up on it. Behavior is usually 6 to 8 weeks, and I know that seems like a long time, right? But when we would put in a behavior plan or intervention in place for a classroom management or a specific student or our tier 1 supports, we think of 6 to 8 weeks as because a couple weeks are spent on teaching it, and then they start to practice it with support, like in I do, we do, you do. So first I would be teaching them the agenda, then they would be working, like we would work together on coaching them through that agenda, and then until they're able to accomplish that agenda on their own. So we would be looking at that 6 to 8 week frame.
And then I think you also have to think about, what am I going to do if a student is off task? How am I going to redirect them or give them different, like, what am I going to do? So do you have any suggestions for that, Tara?
So I think that depends on knowing your student as well. Something that we talked about kind of off camera earlier is making sure that we know what might trigger a student, or we might know what might cause less anxious or more anxious feelings. So for some students, it might be maybe they need to take a break, and they might have some sensory fidgets. Some it might work with redirection. Some it might be prompting them to get support from a peer if they're looking for that peer attention. So I think that there's not really a black or white answer for that piece in particular, but thinking about what works best for your students, what you've seen for each individual student. You may have a student that responds very well to a timer, and you might have, because they want to be on task, they want to please you, they want to get it done, they want to be where their class is, so they stay right in line with a timer. And then you might have some students that a timer makes them feel anxious, makes them feel like they need to rush, and then they actually shut down. So I think just talking with the student initially and asking them, because they might be able to tell you. Sometimes we think about putting all these plans in place and we kind of leave the student out of it. Talking to that student and saying, what can I do to support you? I think is a great place to start, and going from there. And if they don't know what you can do to support them, then you can start to work on different ways that might help redirect them to stay on task.
Mm-hmm. And then the last one just talks about the strategies that accompany the resource. So what would you say that goes in this category?
This might be cues to task, redirection. I like using the interactive rules. So maybe I might say to a student, now what do you do in the first step of check and connect? And then let them recite that first step. And then I might say, now the second step is, now you tell me the third step, and then I might repeat the fourth step. So you have that interaction with the student, not just you providing that information to them all the time, and then increasing that interaction. Maybe you're lining up at the door and you're getting ready to go out for transition. And you might be in line and you might say, okay, when we're going out to the hallway, what's rule number 1? What's rule number 2? What's rule number 3 when we're in the hallway? And remind them every time you go out for transition. Or you might say, I'm going to say number 1, you're going to say number 2, I'll say number 3, or picking different students on different occasions so that we have that interaction with them in the rules, not just always them, you telling them what the rules are once you've established and gone through those standing operating procedures. Or you might pick a student to talk about the agenda. Maybe you have a student each morning that comes in and the announcements are on and they go through, and that might be a classroom job that they go through and walk through what the agenda is for that morning, and they share that with the rest of the classroom. That may make them feel important and valued in the classroom, and talking about which direction the day is going to go.
So make sure you go through, go ahead.
And if you're struggling to think about strategies, please reach out to either one of us. I know sometimes we get stuck and we think, oh, I'm really struggling, and maybe we can't wrap your brain around what strategies because you've tried multiples. We have plenty of strategies in the toolbox that we can come in and we can observe, we can support, we can see what strategies you've done, and we can add some strategies and model some of those strategies for you.
Yeah, so go through, take a reflection, think about what do you have in place already, what do you might need to reinforce a little bit more, and then create a plan. So start with your action plan and think, when are the behaviors happening? When am I struggling with my classroom management or certain students? What resources could I use? And then develop your action plan and think about strategies that can help. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening.